We've got sales tax for manufacturers and distributors, and Chortek partners with Avalara to bring you various webinars on sales tax. And the tagline is sales tax, less taxing and more relaxing, but hopefully not too relaxing that you take a nap during today's presentation. But I think you'll enjoy the presentation today from Sal Carrero. Sal has been in the business for 20-plus years working in software and technology, helping clients become more efficient and effective by automating manual tasks. While an MBA, and maybe at Avalara they've got something other than meaning Masters of Business Administration, but Sal has been with Avalara for about 4 years and has helped over 140 clients navigate through the complicated waters of sales tax compliance. Sal works with Sage partners throughout our region, including Chortek, and he's been a frequent presenter at Sage and partner events. Sal was actually at our Chortek offices back in December for our users group meetings and talked to those that were in attendance regarding sales tax at that point in time as well. Sal's the regional manager with Avalara, and with that, I will let him take it from here. Sal, it's all yours.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. Hey, thanks everyone for making time to attend today. I want to kind of keep this informational and informal, so feel free to ask questions. We'll definitely have time for it at the end. You know, I want to make a couple remarks to preface the whole thing. So first of all, when we say sales tax, we kind of mean it as shorthand for compliance. So as the state and local jurisdictions require you to file taxes for sales and use tax, manage your exempt sales, maybe even do other things like 1099 and W-9 and whatnot. You know, Avalara's whole reason for being is to help you automate those tasks and help you stay compliant. No one does sales tax because it's fun. You do it because you have to by law. And, you know, someone once told me that the 3 most important things every business must focus on to succeed is you're always trying to save time, you're always trying to save money, and you're always trying to grow the business. The one thing we know for sure is doing sales tax manually on your own doesn't accomplish those things, and that's kind of where Avalara fits in. So today we're going to try to speak to a little bit of like, hey, who is Avalara? Basically, what do they do? Why does any of this matter if you're a manufacturer or distributor, especially at first blush, you might not think this is that big of a deal. So we want to talk about some of the kind of weird things that impact you, and then finally kind of talk a little bit about what you can do about it in terms of what Avalara does and maybe some next steps that you might want to take to help your business. And we're going to kind of do a little bit of this will be academic and kind of some interesting facts, and a little bit I'm going to actually show you the software real briefly, and then if anybody wants to, we can set up a one-on-one time to dig into the specifics of your personal situation in a full-blown demonstration at some point in the future. So real quick about Avalara, we've been around for quite a while. We are the leader in this industry, and we are growing like absolute wildfire. More and more companies are deciding to outsource this and automate it. It's very similar to payroll. So for those of you that use ADP or Paychex or someone similar, it's the same concept. Automate a manual task, outsource it, let someone else worry about it. And, you know, I think the fact that we're getting this many new customers, you know, 300 plus last month, and the fact that folks renew at a 97% rate really speaks to the value and the fact that out in the marketplace, people just don't want to do this by themselves anymore. So specifically, what we do is there's 3 different components. So the one is the AvaTax, which is also known as Sage Sales Tax. We're going to calculate tax in over 10,000 different taxing jurisdictions. We can handle hundreds of thousands of different items and automatically know the taxability and the rate and so forth. We will file and remit the returns for you on time and accurate every time. And big thing in your area is to manage that whole exemption documentation process. And it's a really big area of focus for auditors. And then what we're talking about here at the top is that Avalara's whole premise is that however you invoice your customers now, whatever that core line of business app, such as Sage or maybe an e-commerce app, Avalara can integrate to it seamlessly in a matter of a couple hours, and then you go ahead and process orders like you always did, only now you have the comfort of knowing that the calculations are perfect every time. So Give me 1 second. Of course, now I'm having PowerPoint difficulty here. There we go. So sorry about that. So real quick, I'm just going to touch on this. There's 3 components. There's the Sage sales tax, and again, that's the tax engine. We're going to look at the address, we're going to look at the items, and we're going to calculate the tax instantly with nothing for you to upload, download, nothing for you to research. It just does it, and it's the beauty of it. Then with the certificates, we create an automated workflow to make it easy for you to request, make it easy for your clients to reply, and make it easy for you to comply, knowing that you have the right certificate, that it's complete, that it's signed, and that it's current. And then at the end of the month, we create a report. You look at the report, you click approve, Avalara logs in, we complete the return, we remit the funds, we even handle the notices. So you can focus on growing your business, let us handle all the headaches and aggravation that go with sales tax compliance. So more specifically, how it works is we have a pre-built connector, and it connects right into your Sage software. So whether it's 100, the old Math 9200, Sage 300/XPack, 500, X3, Avalara has built-in connectors. We even work with just about any mid-market ERP that you can think of, just about any e-commerce you can think of. So what that means to you is that you never have to research or update a tax schedule again. And you don't even have to worry about making sure you have the correct address, because we do that as well. And it's going to give you the exact right tax calculation every time without anything changing. You just process the order the same way you do now, and it works. So let me jump into this real quick. Okay, so what I'm showing here is a Sage 100 screen, and I want to point out a couple things really quick. This is just super high level. So today you have to have these tax schedules in there, and you have to figure that out and do research and try to interpret what the government means when you look at their website. But with us, you set the tax schedule to AvaTax, and you forget it. What that means is when you go to total your order, Avalara is going to look at the address, and based on the address, we're going to assign jurisdictions, and then we're going to look at the line items, and we're going to know what the taxability is of those line items, and we're going to calculate the tax. So real quick, one of the neat things is with the address, a lot of times you might have incomplete information. Avalara validates the address, and what we'll do is make sure that you've got the exact right address so that we know that we're assigning the right jurisdictions. It also helps because then you're shipping it to the right address and you won't get fined by the carrier. So then when I'm in order entry, I just enter the items, enter the quantities, and I hit total, and it called out to Avalara's tax engine, and it created the tax amount. So I didn't have to think about anything. I didn't have to know anything about tax. I just processed the order. And then if I want to, I can click on this detail, and it'll show me which jurisdictions were taxed in that particular situation. So think about it. Your choice would be set the schedule to AvaTax and off you go, or go to states' websites, look things up, try to guess what they mean. For a lot of folks, this is a lot easier than what they're doing now. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, if you have questions afterwards, we can certainly get into that. Okay, so you look at it and say, well, okay, Sal, that all sounds fantastic, but you know what? Half of my customers, more of my customers are exempt. We really don't charge a lot of sales tax. Well, the fact is there's a lot more to compliance than that. There's actually a lot of audit risk, and what we're seeing is states are hiring more auditors, and they're targeting manufacturing and distribution, and they look at different things versus straight sales tax to look at use tax and exemption certificates and things like that. So sorry about that. My screen is freezing up a little bit. So what happens, and the reason they look at you is the state auditors look at not only who has the most taxable sales, but they look at where is it easy for me to get a good return on my time. So when they go to distributors and manufacturers, they're able to go in, for example, and look at your exempt sales, and if they found mistakes on 10% of the sample, they can extrapolate and charge a fine against 10% of your sales. So it can get really expensive really fast. We have a client, Northern Tool and Die, that had a $700 sale that cost them $22,000, and I heard almost an identical story just the other day from a client that is, I believe, in Wisconsin. So the point is that you have to be careful. So again, the big difference is when you're thinking about sales tax, you have a couple different things to consider, right? How do you calculate sales tax when you have to calculate it, and make sure that you're accurate and you're not missing any jurisdictions? Make sure that you understand the taxability rules, especially like labor can be difficult, like in Illinois, for example, or Michigan. If you deal with that, it's kind of not as straightforward as Wisconsin. Again, on exemption certificates, are you doing that the correct way, and are your returns filings complete and on time? And one of the things that we hear a lot is, even if you feel like you have a handle on all of that right now, one of the things that makes it really challenging is we talk to people every day, and I hear over and over again, we're growing, we're hiring salespeople, we're hiring in the plant, but they're not hiring people in accounting, and so you have to keep figuring out a way to do more with less. So again, couple things that are interesting to manufacturing, right? So if you purchase something and it's going to be used in the manufacturing process, or let's say that you're selling it to someone who's doing that, you know, how do you determine if it's taxable or not? A lot of times there's these tests that say, in some states it says it has to be predominant, which means it's mostly used in the process of manufacturing, then it's exempt. But if it's less than that, then it's not. And then you have other states where it has to be completely used in manufacturing to qualify. So one of the things that trips people up on the buy side is maybe you're a manufacturer and your vendors don't charge you tax because they know you're a manufacturer. You have to be careful because things like safety supplies or Jan sand kind of supplies that you use internally can be charged, you know, you might be due use tax on, even though normally you're exempt. So you have to be real careful about that. And I'm going to try to skim through some of this stuff sort of quickly because for Steve's direction, I think you guys are aware of a lot of this already, so I don't want to totally beat it to death. But again, there's different things like this. So let's say that you have something that you normally buy and you don't pay tax. What happens if you take that out and you use it for a demonstration or for a sample or something like that? So as soon as you do those things, it changes the taxability of that and how it's treated. Another thing that trips people up a lot is you might have a scenario where you have an item that is equipment, and I've seen business models where people lease equipment and or give it away, and they're really making their money on consumables that go with that equipment. You have to be careful about that because when you do that, you might create another obligation. And when I say obligation, what I mean is nexus. And so conceptually, we hear from people all the time who say we file in Wisconsin and Minnesota, but we sell in 20 different states. You have to be careful that your business activities aren't creating obligations in those other states. So, for example, you might have an obligation in Illinois if you have a representative who leaves from Milwaukee and goes into Illinois to deliver something, to install it, to repair it, to sell it, to teach people how to use it. So all those little touch points can create an obligation, and so it expands the complexity of your situation. So one of the things we always tell people to do is you have to be really careful about knowing where you're supposed to collect and file, because it can be very expensive if you find that out because you get audited. So another thing that's kind of funky is what happens if you have something and you're not really using it in manufacturing, but you're using it for quality assurance or R&D. Again, that kind of thing is really tricky. The beautiful thing is what Avalara does is with our content, not only do we know all the different jurisdictions, but we have all the rules for taxability of things depending on these different scenarios. So what we're looking at here is, if you overpaid taxes in areas where, suppliers could have used your exemption certificate, and or if you underpaid taxes where they didn't charge you the correct taxes, this is the kind of stuff that auditors are going to look for, and it's up to the manufacturer to assess taxes on sales and purchases. So you have to be really careful to make sure that you're doing things correctly. And then, there's a whole nother school of thought on drop ships too, which we're not going to get into in great detail here. But the one thing I will say is, if you do drop ships on behalf of your customers, or if folks do them on behalf of you, you have to be really careful, because it can create some interesting scenarios where exempt certificates may no longer be valid, and it might even create a nexus obligation. So it's definitely something that you want to look at in a very purposeful, planful way, so that you're not unintentionally creating liability for your company. So we try to do some stuff here just for fun, because some of the stuff is so silly and crazy that you can't believe it's real. So you look at stuff like this, and this is always more fun if I'm in person, because people can holler out answers. But anyway, let's say you bought a forklift for the warehouse, and you're thinking, well, is it taxable? Well, taxability laws are always changing, and so you have to really be on top of that, because it can be hard to interpret and know what's taxable for each jurisdiction. So the ruling is, if you use a forklift in manufacturing and production and you're actually moving raw materials, then it would be non-taxable. But if you use it like in the warehouse to move around finished goods, it's going to be taxable. I heard a story the other day where they talked about similar thing with shrink wrap. And shrink wrap in and of itself wasn't taxable. It depended on what they did with it. So if they had stuff on a skid out, by the loading docks getting ready to ship, it was treated as taxable, whereas if they used it internally more as part of the process, then it wasn't. So, I mean, it gets really kind of ridiculous. And our point is that you have two choices. You can try to become an expert on this in multiple states, or you can leave it to someone like Avalara to handle it for you. And that's all we're trying to say. It's not that you can't do this, but why would you want to spend time and effort doing it when you can do more important things and less aggravating things, for sure. And just as a side on the topic of kind of, weird tax laws, we've seen things like, one of the things we always talk about is Milky Way, right? So it sounds silly, but if you have regular Milky Ways, they're non-taxable because they have flour. But if you have the dark chocolate one, it is taxable because it doesn't have flour. And then that's not even true in all states, but it's true in a lot of states. And the point we're trying to illustrate there is a lot of these laws are political, and they're just downright silly. So it's very, very hard to keep up with. And then, I think one of the things that affects manufacturing sometimes is, especially if you're do a little bit of contracting, is labor can vary state by state depending on whether it's installation or repair. And then in either case, is it labor involving tangible personal property, or is it just pure labor? So there's so many variables when you think about the things that you do, not only labor, but freight, and then, of course, the items themselves. You have to figure out the taxability, and then you'll also have to worry about, if they are exempt, is it exempt because the client's exempt? Is it exempt because the job's exempt? Is it a direct pay permit, a manufacturing exemption, and on and on and on. So, we think that these are really the two big areas where folks have to watch out. Is the exemption certificates are big, and obviously the more states you go in, the more crazy the return get. So when we talk about drop shipping, what you have to find out is, if you're drop shipping, does that create a nexus obligation in the state, and do you have to drop ship? And a lot of times, let's say you're drop shipping and your customer is in Michigan and you have an exemption certificate, but they want you to drop ship it to New Jersey. Well, New Jersey may not accept that exemption certificate, so suddenly you've got a sale you didn't charge tax for, and you were supposed to charge tax on it. So it gets really complicated really fast, and those are some things that we can help folks with. So a lot of you out there that are involved in this can kind of appreciate this slide, and if you'll forgive the animation, I think it does illustrate the point. So we look at all the fun things that you get to do, and what we always joke is the folks that handle tax compliance in their company, I always say you're like the offensive lineman in football. And what I mean by that is when you do your job perfectly, no one notices, and that's kind of your best case scenario, to stay under the radar. But if you make a mistake, there they are calling your name over the loudspeaker, holding number 77, and sales tax is like that. If you do your job right, no one notices. They don't really pat you on the back. But if you go into the owner's office and say, hey, we've got an $80,000 fine from Wisconsin, that gets everyone's attention. They want to know how it happened. So our job at Avalara is to make sure it never happens. So let's talk a little bit about what we do, right? So we covered this a little bit in the beginning, but again, I just want to review. So there's calculating the tax when you do have taxable sales. There's the certificate process for the exempt sales, and then tying it all together at the end is the returns. So again, the way that AvaTax works, what we showed in the beginning, is we're looking at the address, we're validating it, we're figuring out which jurisdictions are allowed to tax that. Are those items taxable in each particular jurisdiction? And we're doing the calculation. And if you sign up for an individual demo, I'll show you where that information goes and how you can always look at any transaction and get line item detail. So then for your exempt customers, we've got an automated process where you can send a email request for a certificate. Your client would click on a link and file the return, and it connects back into Sage so that we know that they're exempt, and we automate the renewals. And then Avalara will prepare a worksheet so you can see your totals in that state, and they'll actually log on, file the return, send them the money, handle the notices. You outsource the whole thing. So in a nutshell, that's the main part of what we do. We do have some other services we can do, from automating 1099s and W-9s to automating, for folks that sell retail, we can match up UPC codes with tax codes. For folks that are in oil and gas, we can do the federal excise taxes. So really anything that's manual, we have content and software to automate it. So I want to dig in a little bit to the certificate management so that you can understand that a little better, because again, I think this is a key area. And rather than get into a full-blown live demo and spend that much time, I just wanted to kind of walk you through it on slides that hopefully will illustrate it, and then I'd be happy to show people on real software at some point in the future. So you've got to collect the certificate, validate it, make sure it's right, and then make sure that when you came into an audit situation, you can respond to the audit quickly and pass with flying colors. So, there's two parts of an audit. One is you don't ever want to have that unexpected expense, but the other thing is the people that I talk to are working a really high number of hours right now, and they're stretched to the limit. And the last thing you want to do is add on entertaining an auditor to that. So we want to make sure that you can do this without that worst case scenario and without having to hire people, because let's face it, this isn't going to help grow your company to hire more people to handle tax. So, sorry, I went too fast. So again, the whole idea is let Avalara automate it, take as much of your personal time and effort out of it as possible, and let us worry about it. So essentially what happens is we're going to connect Sage to Avalara to the cert capture service and have it all kind of one continuous loop so that we know they're exempt or not, and then you're always going to be compliant whether you're not charging tax or you are charging tax. So the way the cert capture works is Avalara has a template. You send out an email. You collect the certificate. Once you receive the certificate, you can set a renewal date. So I'm going to talk about renewals for a minute. So in most states, when you get the certificate, you have a year from the date of receipt, it'll expire. And for states like Florida, they expire at the end of the calendar year, December 31st, regardless of when you got it. And then you get good old Wisconsin, right? And I can say this because I used to live there. Wisconsin's kind of goofy. If you go to the website, it says that they don't expire exactly, but you should probably get a new one every 2 or 3 years. And then if you look a little closer, what would happen is if you got audited and you didn't have a certificate, let's say you just forgot, you're supposed to get it within 90 days of the sale. So you get it after the fact, but you have to get it quickly. And if you didn't get it, then you're out of luck and you have to pay the tax, and they can also go to your client and collect tax from them and you might even trigger an audit of your client, which nobody wants that. And then the other thing that folks don't always realize with certificates is they're valid as long as they're current and as long as your information and the client's information hasn't changed. But if either one of you have a change in ownership, change of address, anything like that, the certificate's no longer valid. So if you acquire another company, all of their certificates are going to have to get redone so it has the new change of ownership. So there's all kind of little weird things like that that you probably don't think about, and we can help that. And then again, you've got everything electronically, which is really nice because if and when you do get audited, it's extraordinarily easy to do a search, and you can get rid of that auditor in a matter of minutes versus days or months. So what it looks like is from within Avalara, you would go in here and initiate a request for a certificate. And I'm just showing an example of a one-off. Let's say it's a new customer. The customer gets an email. From the email, they're going to click on a link. From the link, they're going to go in and fill out answers to really basic questions and sign electronically. And based on their answers, we pulled the proper certificate, and they click submit, and then you get to view that certificate within the Avalara dashboard and set the renewal, and off you go. So it's really, really straightforward and simple in terms of managing the exemption certificates. So hopefully that's helpful to understand, what we would do about it, and hopefully not too much detail. Okay, so another little funny story, so bear with us. So this is kind of funny, and you have to forgive us because this is all we do at Avalara, so we kind of geek out on the tax details. But think about this. If janitorial services are taxable and commercial services are not taxable, how do you handle this, right? Because it's a little bit of both. And then it turns out that this has actually happened to people, and it turns out that whether it's the inside of the window or the outside of the window, it's different. And the point we're making is just you just have to laugh at this because it's so ridiculous. And that's what makes doing sales tax yourself so hard. Is it's not like there's generally accepted accounting principles that you can learn and apply. It's not like you could throw a bunch of labor at it and say, okay, this month we're going to get compliant and we're going to fix all of our tax schedules and we're going to fix all the rules for our items, and then we'll be done. You can never really be done because it never stays the same. And so that's why folks turn to people like Avalara to automate it. And again, these kind of stories, we hear all the time, and it's the stuff that's so crazy. I mean, you can't make it up. Again, with returns and remittances, and I apologize, Steve, I know this doesn't apply to Wisconsin, but just in case people sell in other places, remember that even if you have a lot of $0 transactions, or all $0, you still have to complete a return. And if you're in states with home rule, it can be more than one return. So Alabama, Colorado, places like that, it's still a burden on you to do it. Again, forgive me for the quote. I didn't say it. A CPA said this to us. We get a lot of referrals from CPA firms. And what the CPA basically was trying to say here through this hopefully comical quote is, yes, the CPAs can do this, but they don't want to touch sales tax because it's too menial and they really can't make money. And for you, you really don't want to do it either because it's not any fun. It's all risk, no reward. And I think you'd rather be doing things that are more strategic for your company. And that's kind of the point we're trying to make here. So I thought I'd put in a couple of statistics. So hopefully some of those stories and examples are kind of funny, but I want to give a couple of statistics as well. So when we asked people, why are you buying our software, and we had a third party do this, they found out that people were spending a lot of hours per month on this. And if you do the math, you're already spending money on this, and a significant amount of money. And then what we found is when we talked to business owners and C-level executives, half of them readily admitted that if they were audited, the auditors would likely find mistakes. And when you think about it, these are C-level executives with a fiduciary responsibility for their company and the tax compliance, and they admit that they're probably wrong. I mean, these are guys that probably have their sock drawer all perfectly arranged in a line, and yet they're living with the ambiguity here because they're throwing out their hands. So that's kind of the point we're making there. And with Avalara, it's very easy to pay back because even with the expense of Avalara's service, it's typically much less than what your time is worth and certainly eliminates the risk. The other thing, again, is aggravation, right? People don't want to do this. One of the things that really tells us that we're doing this right is we have a 96% renewal rate. And the importance of that is when you buy Avalara, you buy like a year's worth of the service, and then you can go back to your old way, or you can go to a competitor or whatever you want to do. But people don't do that. Once they start using our software, they always use our software. And I'll tell you why. It's a lot like an appliance. So the analogy I use is a smartphone. So I'm, let's call it 40-something, and I didn't think I needed a smartphone 4 years ago. I mean, I just got used to the idea that I had a BlackBerry, a laptop, what do you call them, iPod, and all these different devices, right? But then somebody told me I had to get an iPhone, so I got one, and now it's just amazing. I can do 20 different things with it, and I don't go anywhere but to sleep and in the shower without my iPhone. I mean, you pretty much have it everywhere. So forgive the analogy, but what I'm trying to say is sometimes you don't realize how good things can be because you're so used to what you always do, and then once you try a new way and a better way, you just can't believe you ever got along without it. And we hear that a lot. So hopefully that makes sense. So I thought I'd share this a little bit. Sometimes people still aren't sure after all this of, does this fit me? So I want to give you an example of who it fits the most. So if you do business in multiple states, if you're filing in multiple states, this is a no-brainer. If one of those states is Illinois or California or Texas, this is a no-brainer. People also seem to be really interested in Avalara when they're upgrading or implementing a new ERP, because we can make that a lot faster for them because you don't have to build tax schedules. We also find that if you're in a really growing business, as you get into new geography, new products, new hires, those usually create more obligations, which creates more complexity. And then particular industries like medical and technology are very difficult, and we can certainly help with those industries. And then on the returns, or excuse me, on the certificates, the more certificates you have, the harder it is to manage. And one of the things that we find people make the mistake of is they only collect certificates in the 2 or 3 states they file, and they don't collect them in the other states. Well, the problem with that is if one of those other states should come to you and audit you and say, hey, you've got to file in our state because you do business here and you don't have the documentation, it can be very hard to fight that off. But if you've been collecting the certificates all along, you can say, hey, New Jersey, that's fine. My sales are exempt. Here's my documentation, and send them on their way. So a lot of this speaks to the reason to automate. So the more certificates you have, the more states you file in, the more you need this. If you have tough taxability where it changes a lot, again, the bigger the value Avalara is. But one thing I want to tell you is even if you're only in a single state, there's still benefits to this because we hear over and over again that owners don't want to spend any time on this. They don't want to spend any money. And one of the things that Sage and Avalara have done is if you're only in a single state, we've got a pricing model where it's a little bit less, like about 40% less than the folks who are in multiple states. So don't necessarily tune out if you say, hey, Sal, we only file in Wisconsin, maybe we don't need it. It's still a good value there. So hopefully this helps a little bit. If you hadn't heard enough to recognize yourself, I thought I'd give some of the criteria that we look for when seeing who might be a fit. So a couple things you can do about this. We do a compliance checkup with folks. And what we do is we ask these kind of questions. We look at where you sell, how you sell. Do you have nexus somewhere where you don't know it? Do you have questions about the taxability of your products or your services? What are your most aggravating areas of this? Can we make them better? And we'll look at all those things, and we'll kind of talk you through your current situation. And then what we'll do is we'll show you the full-blown demo of the software. And for a lot of folks, once you see the demonstration and how much easier that would be than doing it yourself, it's a real easy decision to move forward with Avalara. But the first part is we're going to walk you through some of these questions to help you get a good assessment. And what's nice about that is, it's a great starting point as you try to develop your tax policy and take a look at your processes. And by the way, sometimes we do this and we determine that folks are fine doing it manually in their situation. Not everybody needs what we do. A lot of people do, most people do, but not everybody, and that's fine. You know, the nice thing is you get a third party to give you some feedback on it. That's the bulk of what I wanted to cover. Steve or Calais, if you want to open it up, if there's any questions, be happy to entertain them now.
Well, thanks, Sal. One of the things that we run into is setting up those tax codes and tax schedules in Sage 100, and we get asked many questions in terms of the taxability and filling out the sales tax returns. Whenever we get those questions, we do one of two things. One is that we in the software area can't provide tax advice, so we either refer them to their tax provider or Michelle Horst from our Chortek office in Waukesha enjoys dealing with taxes. Michelle, you may have met, some of you have met because she does our tax update at our users group meeting in December every year. But on the other hand, we'd prefer you to talk to Sal at Avalara and see how they can automate that process. We've got a few clients that are using this. One that I know of for sure that's on the call that's currently using it. So if you are interested in talking more with Sal, you can do that directly. And if you want to talk to somebody who is using Sage 100 with Avalara, we can have you do that as well. But whenever you've got these sales tax questions, we've got clients that do business in California, and that's a nightmare state from a sales tax standpoint. And we've already had Avalara talk with them about automating it because it is such a pain to do business in California. But if you do have any questions regarding sales tax, by all means, contact the consultant that works with you to help support your Sage 100, or you've got Sal's information direct. Please feel free to reach out to him directly as well.
And if there are any questions on the line right now, you can go ahead and use the chat feature or the questions area, and we can try to take some of those online today as well.
And Clay, while you're waiting for that, one thing that's been coming up a lot lately, and it kind of dovetails into what Steve was just saying, is we hear a lot from folks who they have a hard time determining what local jurisdictions apply. And so Wisconsin's straightforward because you have state, county, and maybe like a Packers tax, although I think that one might be ending. But as you get into more and more states, you not only have the state and the county, but you have local jurisdictions, maybe city or village or whatever, and then you also have special tax jurisdictions, they call them, which could be like a stadium, a transportation, arts, some sort of public funding initiative. And what's tricky about those is the boundaries, are nothing like the zip code, and those are taxes that come and go. So you always have to be updating the schedule for a particular customer location. And that's something that we do automatically and save you from having to deal with.
And Sal, you brought up a good point about the Brown County stadium tax ending in terms of being able to know when that ends or when new county taxes take place. We had a client that we migrated from another system, took a look at their tax codes. They hadn't looked at, I think, an Ohio tax for a few years, and it actually had gone from 5 to 7%. So they weren't even charging the right tax because they weren't keeping up to date on what the tax changes were. So that's where Avalara can help in making sure that everything that's coming on board new or expiring, like the Brown County stadium tax, that you're charging based on the invoice date, the proper taxes at the proper time. Minneapolis is a big concern as well. We've got, even within the Minneapolis area, there's various different, as Sal indicated, local taxes. Depending on the street address, depends on whether that tax is applicable or not. And so clients are asking us all the time to set up more and more tax codes and schedules in Sage 100, and it's easier just to say, let's set up, Avalara, put Avatax in the schedule, and then you know everything is handled properly.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And one thing I did want to mention too to folks, and again, I want to make this informative and not salesy, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't share this. So Sage is actually promoting Avalara right now, so I think the one that applies is the one on the left here, obviously. But basically, there's you know what, that's the wrong promotion, so hang on a minute. Sorry about that. I'll just tell you, forgive me. I should look at my slides more closely. So what they're doing right now, and Steve, you can validate this because you guys got the email from Sage, but the short version is the way Avalara works is there's pricing based on your number of transactions that you use for the calculation service, and then there's an annual fee and there's a setup fee. And so right now Sage is waiving the setup fee. So even at the low end, it saves you about $500, and you know at the high end, it could even be into the thousands. So if you were even thinking about it, now it's a good time to think about it if you're so inclined. I just want to make sure people knew that was out there.
Yeah, that was a good point, Sal, because we didn't put that in the email. In terms of that savings is, I believe, through the end of June.
Yeah, I think that one's through the end of the quarter, and then Avalara through the end of April is doing a free installation, which is normally a $830 charge. So again, don't mean to high pressure anybody, but on the other hand, if you're thinking about it, it behooves us to take a look at it quickly, and you know, please take advantage of it while you can. So, hey, thanks, Steve, so much for having us. I really appreciate it. I always like doing these events. Hopefully, I get to do another one in person again, because that's the hard part about this. I can't see any body language, so hopefully people were interested the whole time. But thank you, and I look forward to hearing from folks that were on the call and doing some one-on-one conversations and answering questions in the coming weeks.
Thanks, Sal. Everyone, have a great day.